What parallels can we draw between the challenges faced by Nordic societies during the Little Ice Age and the global warming crisis that the Nordics are living through today? On the face of it, the contexts are very different. Everyday life in early modern times was vastly different from what we experience now, especially relative to the knowledge and technologies people had to control and manipulate their living environments. And while the Little Ice Age saw a general cooling pattern with all of its associated impacts, today we are experiencing warming. But on closer inspection, we see that a lot of the underlying factors or features that shaped how Nordic societies adapted to the Little Ice Age also apply to how they adapt to climate change today. Studying the Little Ice Age shows us what to pay attention to in devising climate adaptation strategies. In this final lesson, we will go through some of the central themes of the previous 5 lessons and relate them to how scientists, policymakers, businesses, and citizens plan to live with a changing climate. Lesson 1 discussed the different global systems that overlapped and contributed to the cooling we saw in the Little Ice Age, from the Earth's orbit to geothermal activity. And this is an important way of thinking about climate change today, too. While the central process is global warming associated with gases collecting in the atmosphere and retaining more of the sun's radiation, what environmental change looks like in different places depends on connections, feedbacks, and tipping points between a lot of different Earth systems. Think about how melting of the glaciers in the Nordics reduces how much solar radiation is reflected back into space and can increase warming, or how changes in sea temperature may suddenly change ocean currents, like the Gulf Stream, or how changes in rainfall patterns will alter the water pulsing through rivers and lakes. Importantly, it is very complex to map all of these interacting systems, so there is a lot of uncertainty about how the Earth will react to changes, and that makes it difficult to predict or plan for adaptation. Like in the Little Ice Age, we have to pay attention to the changes around us, muddle forward and do the best we can to cope, but also transform our societies to be more resilient, so that Nordic societies will not collapse in the face of change. Lesson 2 talked about the impacts associated with the cooling in the Little Ice Age, some of which were experienced as unprecedented. Today too, we live with climate-related impacts or hazards that feel markedly different to what we have experienced over the past 100, 200 years. For example, more extreme rain in Bergen, Norway, has triggered landslides that carry away houses and people, demanding that the local municipality redraw hazard maps. And rare floods that were statistically expected only once every 200 years may now be expected every 100 or even 50 years. The risk these hazards pose to Nordic societies is shaped by people's exposure and vulnerability, as during the Little Ice Age. Earlier, it was assumed that Norway was not very exposed to climate risks at all, but a report by scientists in Cicero in 2004 highlighted how impacts, like extreme rain, would not be evenly spread over the country. They projected that some places, like Bergen, already considered the wettest city in Europe, will receive even more rain than other areas of Norway. Those worst impacted by hazards are the most vulnerable. Think about poor communities who can't afford expensive infrastructure, or migrant communities or elderly people who might not have the same social networks to access support in case of a disaster. Just like during the Little Ice Age, geographers Karen O'Brien and Robin Lechenko today talk about society's double exposure to climate change and globalization, where communities are forced into poverty cycles and then become vulnerable to climate change. Lesson 3 discussed how Nordic societies experienced the impacts of the Little Ice Age, and contemporary climate change exhibits some of the same types of impacts. Societies today also face changing seasonal rhythms and daily timings from when to plant, when to fish, or maintain a city's stormwater system. Conversely to the Little Ice Age, the winter season is now shrinking by at least a month in many places since the 1970s, and some activities like skiing are becoming less and less possible. Like during the Little Ice Age, climate change today is altering patterns of agriculture and transport, with implications for food security or the ability of Nordic societies to feed themselves. Ship transport is impacted by changing patterns of storms, for example, as is the crops that can be grown in Nordic countries. The last 15 years has seen increasing droughts that make some crops less easy to grow, while on the other hand, some fruits that could never grow in the cold north, like grapes, are finding small niches in sunny valleys. Swedish climate adaptation scientist Richard Klein talks about how these impacts are not confined to individual Nordic countries, but spill over national borders. Climate change is impacting the range of reindeer herds across the north of Norway and Sweden and Finland, and how Sami communities migrate with their herds. It's interesting, but the impacts felt from the cooling during the Little Ice Age are good predictors of the kinds of impacts we're experiencing today. Lesson 4 discussed the role of a cooler climate and the difficult weather and seasons of the Little Ice Age on larger scale social and political movements in that period. How did the lean years ferment social movements, for example? And indeed, we see that climate change today is also a political flashpoint, as geographer Mike Hulme would say. Some people partly attribute the revolutions in the Middle East during the Arab Spring in the early 2010s to difficult weather and seasons during that time, while the United Nations Refugee Agency notes that climate-related disasters triggered more than half of reported refugee displacements in 2002, for example. Indeed, looking closer to the Nordics, we see social movements like Fridays for Future, when students went on strike from school to protest a lack of response to climate change, as driving a wedge between generations in Nordic societies. One interesting difference is that while this course has studied the trajectory of history as being shaped by the climate in the Little Ice Age, many climate scientists and policymakers today are rather projecting future trajectories or pathways for how Nordic and global societies will develop over the next 50 or 100 years, and what this will mean for future climate change. Terms like shared socioeconomic pathways are used to describe different ways of imagining how society will change over the years to come. Will there be more people moving to cities? Less cars? More green energy? More or less political stability? How will the economy perform? All of these developments will affect the gases that societies put into the atmosphere and how resilient they will be to changes. And Lesson 5 looked at the ways in which Nordic societies adapted to climatic change in the Little Ice Age, and again we see many of the same types of responses deployed today. Building materials and techniques for homes or infrastructures are changing to accommodate changes in weather patterns and averages. As the potato was a key strategy during the Little Ice Age, today too, laboratories are trying to breed new strains of potato and other crops that will suit a warmer climate. Of course, the climate has also become a major focus of research, and there are large networks of scientists worldwide who are tracking and predicting climate change and how they can best respond. Think of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for example. And there are efforts to ensure that international food chains, trade bringing food to the Nordics, are maintained and sustained.